Welcome to How to Interpret Your Bible class. My name is Spencer Conway, and I'm one of the pastors on staff here at Rock Church Halifax. And it's my hope that this would be a resource that would help you in your walk with Jesus and your study of the Bible. So we just wanted to say thank you for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our channel so you can stay up to date with all of the new content we're posting every week. But for now, we really hope that you enjoyed this teaching. So let me just say first and foremost that this is not an exhaustive, everything I'm about to tell you is not exhaustive at all. I mean, come on, let's just think about the book of Revelation and then just you got 20 minutes to tell us how to interpret Revelation. Yeah, okay, good luck, These are guidelines, right? They're meant to be helpful for you. They're meant to be kind of, road kind of guardrails, I guess you could say, to kind of keep you moving along in the right direction. But there is so much that could be said of the book of Revelation, and there's as I was even preparing the content, there's a lot that I could have included in here. But again, because of how we're trying to do this course, we're trying to kind of give an overview of the discipline of hermeneutics from a 30,000-foot level. You kind of have to pick what to include and what not to include. So let's get started with this whole idea, interpreting Revelation. How the heck do we do this? So first off, let's talk about the different approaches. So in general, you can kind of narrow down the approaches to interpreting Revelation to four main views or four main approaches. Okay? So we have what's called the preterist approach. The preterist approach takes the historical context of Revelation seriously and attempts to understand the book the way that John's audience would have understood it. Hoo-ha. We like that. That's good. Awesome. Historical context matters. Many of the events of Revelation are seen as having been fulfilled in the first century. That's interesting. Then there's the historicist approach, which views Revelation as a map or an outline of what happened or will happen throughout church history from the first century until the return of Christ. So you got the preterist approach, the historicist approach. And then next to that, you have the futurist approach, which views most of the book as related to future events immediately preceding the end of history. And then lastly, you have what's called the idealist approach. The idealist approach does not understand Revelation in terms of any particular reference to time, but rather they relate it to the ongoing struggle between good and evil. So here's the approach that we want to encourage you to take when you're reading the book of Revelation. I talked a couple, I don't know when it was, but I talked about some of the dangers of pre-understanding. It was one of our first classes. And one of the aspects of pre-understanding that you have to be aware of is theological agendas. And the problem with committing 100% to any one of these approaches is that you go into a particular passage that all of a sudden, maybe doesn't fit with the theological agenda of your approach, and you're either forced to reconsider what your assumptions were, or you're forced to kind of just fudge the data a little bit and force a unnatural interpretation on the passage to fit your theological agenda. And so I would advocate for the wording I would call an eclectic approach. I know that that's an interesting word, but really all I mean by that is to try to combine the strengths of all four approaches. Not to necessarily be married to one approach, but to try to approach Revelation free of theological agendas, study the passage, and just study the passage and let your study of the passage lead you to particular conclusions to the best of your ability based on your study. And when you look at those four approaches, there's probably going to be a lot of good in a lot of those approaches. A really great idea that I've been wrestling with a lot is this idea that oftentimes the truth is in the tension. And there's tension in Scripture, right? Sometimes people who are always wanting to deal in absolutes are actually going to be frustrated with learning about hermeneutics and learning how to interpret the Bible faithfully, because the fact is there's a lot of tension in Scripture. It's not contradiction, it's tension. And the truth oftentimes is found in the midst of that tension. Here's a couple examples of why it might be smart to use an eclectic approach. Revelation certainly seems to address the first Christians directly. Okay, when you read it, there's the letters to the churches, right? So that would seemingly fall in line with the first approach that we talked about, the preterist approach. It's like, okay, yeah. So there's letters to churches, so yeah, that makes sense. Great, cool. So we should read Revelation the same way that we read every other book of the Bible, by taking its historical context seriously. We already talked about that. But then like the idealist approach, the struggle between good and evil. It does also present timeless truths for surviving the struggle between good and evil. Like that's just true about the book. So it's like, okay, yeah, I can see that. The visions of Revelation challenge us to forsake our complacency and to stay faithful during times of persecution. Moreover, this book certainly has something to say about events still to come, right? So it's like, okay, yeah, futurist. Okay, that approach seems to make sense there. Some events it describes await future fulfillment, the return of Christ, the great white throne judgment, the arrival of the city of Jerusalem. And so you can see how it's not as simple as just saying, yeah, this is my approach. I'm a futurist. It's like, no, let's just study the Bible and see where honest study of the Bible takes us, and not necessarily be married to any one particular approach. So what I want to offer you here is 7 guidelines when you're reading Revelation. 7 guidelines, and then we're going to conclude and call it a day. I think that these are really, really great guidelines that are going to help you. So let's get started. Number 1, so important. Please read Revelation with humility. And this is a guideline for all reading of the Bible. But let's come to the Bible as interpreters with a humble heart. Let's just assume that we really don't know a lot, and that we need to just humble ourselves under the Word, and we want to resist revelation-made easy approaches. Okay, it's not easy. It's not easy. It's probably the hardest book in the Bible to interpret and understand. So, with that being said, people who have to satisfy their curiosity, or people who are unwilling to live with any level of uncertainty, are the most likely to read into Revelation things that are not actually there. Okay? So there has to be on some level a comfort with uncertainty. This is a book that is giving a revelation of the end of time as we know it. The trajectory that God is leading the universe towards. That's a big idea. Whoa. And so for a finite human being, for any one of us with our limited abilities, with our infallible minds, to think that we can have absolute certainty on all these kind of confusing images, we got to just be humble. We got to be careful of that. Now, that's not to say that we should just live in skepticism land. We don't want to just live in skepticism land, but it is important. Beware of interpreters who appear to have all the answers to even the smallest of questions. Experts who claim absolute knowledge about every minute detail of Revelation should be held in suspicion. Reading with a humble mind means that we are willing to admit that our interpretation could be wrong, and to change our view when the biblical evidence points in a different direction. So if you're like a 100% futurist and it's like the whole book is all prophetic, forget about the historical context, it doesn't matter, it's a prophetic book, and then you're reading the letters to the churches, and I don't know how anybody would try to reinterpret that, but it's like, well, you have to change your interpretation because it just doesn't make sense. Number 2, discover the message to the original readers. Discover the message to the original readers. Discovering the message to the original audience is the top priority with any book of the Bible, but especially with this one. When it comes to reading Revelation, the tendency that we often fall into is to ignore the first Christians and jump directly into God's message for us today. Beware of that tendency. Many people use today's newspapers as the key to interpreting Revelation, but as Craig Keener points out, the newspaper approach assumes that we must be living in the last Christian generation. Okay? I might be stepping on some toes here when I say this, but let me just offer a few things to consider, okay? Number 1, the first generation of Christians believed that they were the last generation of Christians, right? Like Peter and Paul, they all believed that Jesus was going to come back for them before they died. So we already have precedent for, that generation believing that they were the last generation. And when you study church history, there's certainly been many, many, many different people throughout the last 1,000 years when different stuff started to go on, started to believe that they were the last generation of Christians. And I know that it's common sometimes. I'm I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm not even really sure what I think, if I'm being incredibly honest. Like, I haven't done this crazy in-depth study of Revelation verse by verse. I don't know what I think. I've heard a lot of ideas put forward, but all I'm saying is let's consider a few things. This kind of newspaper approach to interpreting Revelation implies that in Revelation, God was not really speaking to the very first Christians. If the entire book is only about the future, that implies that there was no real point for the real Christians. Doesn't that seem arrogant on our part as contemporary interpreters? What if Christ doesn't return until AD 4000? Would Revelation still have a message for us, since we would not be the last generation? We must never forget that the first Christians were blessed by obeying Revelation, and that the book is described as an unsealed or open book, even for people living in John's day. So the best place to begin is with the question, what was John trying to communicate to his audience? The same question that we begin with in any book of the Bible. What is the authorial intent? Because whatever the author meant to communicate, that's what the Holy Spirit meant to communicate. So what was John trying to communicate to his audience? If our interpretation makes no sense for the original audience or the original readers, we've probably missed the meaning of the passage. Fee and Stewart say that with the epistles, the primary meaning of Revelation is what John intended it to mean, which in turn must also have been something his readers could have understood it to mean. We must understand what it meant in John's day in order to understand what it means today. Okay? A great little one-liner to remember when it comes to principles of interpretation. In order to understand what it means, we must understand what it meant. In order to understand what it means, we must first understand what it meant. What did this mean first and foremost to the people who actually in real life received the letter from the real author? So remember authorial intent. Number 3, don't try to discover a strict chronological map of future events. The book of Revelation is filled with prophetic apocalypse visions that serve to make a dramatic impact on the reader rather than to present a precise chronological sequence of future events. Consider this for a moment. If the purpose of Revelation, if God's heart was to give us an absolute chronological map of every single event that was going to unfold preceding up to the return of Jesus and after that point, I think that he probably would have made it very obvious and very clear. Now, I might be wrong on that, and I admit that I could be wrong on that, but I think it's a point to consider. There's a lot of ambiguity when you read Revelation, and even when you take into account a chronological reading, like from chapter 1 through to chapter 22, there's like in the different seals of judgment, if you take into account Revelation chapter 6, where the 6th seal is poured out, that whole passage ends with references to the end of the age. And then only a few chapters later, it seems as though we're back to a reference prior to the end of the age. You see what I'm saying here? So when you try to go into Revelation with this agenda to create this strict chronological map, you're kind of forcing the text to maybe say things that John wasn't originally trying to communicate. I'm not 100% certain that John's purpose for the original readers was to give them a chronological map of how everything was going to happen. You can take that with a grain of salt, but I think it's worth considering. Rather than searching for a chronological map of future events in Revelation, I would encourage you to grasp the main message in each vision about living in the here and now. Right? There has to be application for our lives today. If there was application for the original audience in John's day, there's got to be application for our lives today. And so just like in the Gospels, you want to look at the individual episodes and then the way that the episodes are arranged. You want to look at the individual visions and then the way that the visions are arranged and try to discern what the principles are embedded in here that can impact our lives in the here and the now. Okay, number 4. Take Revelation seriously, but don't always take it literally. Take Revelation seriously, but not always literally. Now, I want to make myself incredibly clear here, okay? Because this type of a statement can be easily misunderstood. A lot of the times when people in these conversations around hermeneutics and interpreting the Bible throw out, the idea of interpreting something symbolically, they're doing this in order to deny the reality of a scriptural truth or a historical event. Michael Gungor is a great example. Some of you may be aware of Gungor, but there was a couple years ago, Gungor, he's kind of been on a deconstructionist journey where he's really kind of, I don't know if he's fallen away from the faith. I don't want to say anything that I'm not 100% certain on. It certainly seems like he's kind of in a journey in that sense. And he made a tweet on Easter Sunday a couple years back that said, "He is risen." And then he put in parentheses, well, at least metaphorically anyway. And so he's adopted an interpretation of the resurrection of Jesus as metaphorical. Like, yeah, I don't understand how that works. But that's how a lot of the conversation is framed when we start to talk about understanding something symbolically. That's not what we're saying here. That's not what I'm saying here. We're not saying, don't take it literally, sometimes take it symbolically in order for us to deny the Scripture's truth or to deny the reality of a historical event. When they say that something is figurative or symbolic, they mean that it's not real or that it never happened, right? That is not what I'm talking about. I would insist that picture language with its symbols, images, and figures is capable of conveying literal truth and describing literal events. Picture language is just another vehicle or another way of communicating reality. When you're walking down the hallway and you see that yellow sign with the symbol or the picture of the person falling, the symbol of the person falling does not suggest a denial of the reality or the truth of what might happen if someone slips on the water. It's a symbol that represents something that truly could happen, right? And so the symbols in Revelation, when we talk about understanding something symbolically, it's not denying the truth of something or the historical reality of something that's going to take place. Okay, that's really, really, really important. Revelation uses picture language to emphasize historical reality rather than to deny or diminish it. So when we say that you should not always interpret it literally, we're not saying that there's nothing that's historically real about this. One of the ground rules of interpretation is that our method of interpretation should always match the literary genre used by the author. Right? I already talked about this, and I'm going to say it again. I want you to remember this. Correct interpretation is dependent upon correct identification of the communication. Okay? As a result, we should avoid taking picture language literally. Because if I'm giving you a metaphor, I'm giving you a metaphor. It's not meant to be taken literally. It's a metaphor. It's a picture. It's an image that represents something else. When we try to force a literal method on the genre of picture language, we run the risk of perverting the author's intended meaning. This is really good. We are told in Revelation 1:1 that God has signified the book to John. That's the word there. The word translated signify suggests that God has communicated the book to John by means of signs and symbols. Right? Man, that's an important interpretive key there. It's right there in the text, that word signified. God has communicated the book to John by means of signs and symbols. So when interpreting much of the Bible, this is important. When interpreting much of the Bible, the general rule is to interpret literally except where the context clearly calls for a symbolic reading, right? Take the book of the Gospels, okay? We're going to interpret the narrative about Jesus' life literally except for when the context is calling for a symbolic reading. So when Jesus is teaching in parables, the context is clear. This is a parable. This is a metaphor. So in general, that's the rule for most of the Bible, but it's different in Revelation. The word signify in Revelation 1:1 suggests that because the entirety of this book seems to be coming to us through the use of symbols and signs, the general rule is kind of in reverse. Interpret symbolically unless the context calls for a literal reading, okay? It's a good interpretive key when you're reading Revelation. If the book of Revelation was given to John from God in the form of signs and symbols, which it clearly is, it's a book full of these signs and symbols, if we're going to honor the type of communication that's taking place, we need to read symbolically until the immediate context calls for a literal reading, okay? So I've had questions from students before about, how do I know in the book of Revelation whether or not I should interpret it symbolically or literally? The knee-jerk reaction or tendency should be to interpret symbolically unless it's calling for a literal reading based on the immediate context. Is that okay? You hearing me? Number 5, pay attention when John identifies an image. We should pay close attention when John identifies or defines the images for his readers. So a great example is one of the first images that is introduced before the 7 letters, the images of lampstands. There is a verse where John clearly identifies the meaning of the lampstands. The 7 lampstands represent the 7 churches. It's like, oh, great, thank you. Thank you, John. You made that easy. Could you have made it a little bit easier on the other ones? I'm just kidding. Sometimes I wish he would have just told me what all of the images meant, but alas, that's not the situation we find ourselves in. But with all that being said, the point is, pay attention. When he does identify the meaning of an image, perfect. You got a key there, right? When images that John has identified are repeated elsewhere in the book, we should assume that they probably refer to the same things, right? So he uses similar images in different parts. However, that being said, you have to be careful not to confuse John's direct identification of an image with John's fluid use of images. In other words, John is not shy about using the same image to refer to different things. In other words, it's confusing. And you got to be really, really deep in your study of what these images represent, okay? Be thoughtful, be disciplined. It can be kind of confusing. Number 6, this is going to be a really helpful key to some of the confusion that can come when we try to interpret what all these symbols and signs represent. Look at the Old Testament and historical context when interpreting images and symbols. So the big question that all of us are asking when we're reading the book of Revelation is, what the heck does that mean, right? Talking about some beast, the number 666. What is John talking about, okay? When you come across any sign or symbol that you don't know what it means, the 2 main things you want to turn to inform your understanding of the meaning behind these symbols is the Old Testament and the historical context. Because, again, the Old Testament is the primary document that is informing the worldview of the early Christians. And so you see the Old Testament referenced all throughout Revelation. In fact, it's the book in the Bible that has the most Old Testament references. They're not quotations. There's not many quotations of verses, but it's references, it's allusions, it's imagery. And then historical context as well. Sometimes there may be images that John is using that may not have parallel meanings in the Old Testament, but when you study the historical context and the ideas that the culture had at the time of some of these images, for instance, the woman clothed in the sun, it's like, okay, what did the culture understand the sun to mean? Let's look into that. Let's look into what the historical context would suggest regarding the meaning of some of these images. Revelation uses language at several different levels. There's the text level, the vision level, and the referent level. Try not to get confused in this. Here's what we mean. At the text level, you have words written on the page. At the vision level, you have the picture that the words paint. And at the referent level, you have what the vision refers to in real life. One of the most difficult aspects of reading Revelation is knowing what the images and symbols refer to. You can see the text level, you know how to read English. You can imagine in your mind what the picture is, but it's the meaning that is difficult. We usually know what Revelation is saying, but we are often not sure what it is talking about. So like I already said, although there's no explicit Old Testament quotation in Revelation, the book is filled with echoes and allusions to the Old Testament. In fact, Revelation contains more Old Testament references than any other New Testament book, with the Old Testament appearing in almost 70% of Revelation's verses. 70%! Whoa! Okay, yeah, Old Testament matters a lot.
better be referencing the Old Testament when you're trying to discern what the heck these images mean. As we struggle to identify what the vision or what the image is about, we should turn to the historical context and to the Old Testament. Last but not least, then we're going to call it a night. Focus on the main idea. Here's a good thing to write down. When reading Revelation, the main thing is to make the main thing the main thing. When reading Revelation, the main thing is to make the main thing the main thing. Focus on the main idea. We already talked a little bit about the purpose of Revelation. In many ways, it's to answer the question, who is Lord? And the theme that we see throughout every single part is that God will win. God will win in the end, okay? With most literary genres in the Bible, we begin with the details and build our way towards an understanding of the whole, right? You're focusing on a passage, you scrutinize the details, here's some things that I observe, All right, now let's take into account the broader context. With Revelation, however, we should start with the big picture and work toward an understanding of the details. As we seek to identify theological principles in Revelation, we should focus on the main ideas. The details of any particular section will heighten the impact on the reader, but will not change the main idea. Resist the temptation to focus on the details so much that you miss the main idea. With this in mind, it's important, anyway, I don't know why I was reading that. That was a little typo there. Anyway, in conclusion, we're going to just conclude now. In the book of Revelation, God pulls back the curtain to give his people a glimpse of his plans for human history. Center stage in this cosmic drama is Jesus Christ, the Lion and the Lamb who secures victory through sacrifice. Revelation is strange because it's blended literary genre, prophetic apocalyptic letter, but it is not a closed book. We can grasp the meaning of Revelation and apply it to our lives, but we need to play by the rules, not our own. As we study the historical context of Revelation, we see a situation where Christians were increasingly being persecuted for their faith because they refused to join the pagan parade. Revelation encourages the persecuted and warns those who were selling out. The purpose of the book is to answer the question, who is Lord? And Revelation shows us in picture language that Jesus, rather than Caesar, and that means any Caesar, is Lord. Jesus is Lord. And as we read, we are reminded that God wins, and we continue on in hope. And I'll close with this. The book of Revelation is a book that I want to study more, and part of the reason is because when you lose a loved one, the topic of eschatology becomes super, super important. And even though I haven't necessarily taken time to study Revelation in depth, verse by verse, I have taken time to dig into some of the general topics that Revelation puts forward as it relates to what the Bible teaches about the end times, about the direction and the trajectory of the world and of our lives. And all I can say is when you start to dig into some of those main ideas of what the Bible teaches, it is encouraging, it is comforting, it is so amazing to be able to stand on a hope that, man, God's going to win. God's going to win in the end. We have nothing to worry about, even though we may be facing persecution or trouble or struggle in this moment right now. God has everything under control, and he is going to reign in the end. God's kingdom will be established in its fullness, and one day you and I are going to be in the new heavens and the new earth, living a very real afterlife, right? We're not just going to be fat, chubby cupids floating up in the sky in some ethereal, floaty dreamland. No, it's a physical, tangible, real-life experience that we will all have in the afterlife. And we're going to know each other, and we're going to have things to do, and we're going to, just as the original mandate was given to Adam and Eve to cultivate and to bring good things out of the earth, we're going to have this amazing mandate under the reign of Jesus to continue to expand his good creation in the new heavens and the new earth. And it's going to be so amazing. I'm so excited. Anyway, that's all we got for tonight. So thank you guys for coming.